Hello, I'm Helen Colebrook from Journal with Purpose, and welcome to my first of 6 episodes that we'll be sharing here on Everything Art TV. I'm so excited to be here, and over these 6 sessions I'm going to share with you lots of journaling and brush lettering tips and looking at how we can progress those skills. I've been journaling on and off all my life really, but I started sharing them online about 5 or 6 years ago now. And since then I've had the amazing opportunity to write and publish 2 books. I've been interviewed on lots of podcasts and worked on wonderful collaborations. It seems that more and more people are turning to creativity and journaling as a really positive outlet, and that's definitely what's happened for me. Over the years, I've gradually developed my journaling style, and I love using it to document everything that's going on in our daily lives and also make sure that I focus on lots of the good things. So I really use it to help turn my mindset around and look out for the really good little things in life that we often miss. One of the things I often get asked by people looking to start a journal is saying, my life's just not interesting enough to document, but I really don't believe that's true. I think that nobody else will have your views on the world, nobody's going to have your thoughts and feelings, and I think they're so important to document, along with, in your journals, taking the time to document the little things which happen in life, which actually make it really good and interesting. And that's what we'll be focusing on in today's session, is looking for some of those little treasures that we have in life, how we can document them in our journals, and of course we're going to be looking at some brush lettering too. When I first started brush lettering, I was absolutely awful at it. So if you're right at that beginner stage, please do stick with it. I'm going to give you some tips right at the beginning of the lesson to make sure that you can kind of grasp the basics of brush lettering. But the most important thing is going to be consistency and practice and getting used to those brush pens. So please stay with it. I used to sit there in the evening just for 5 or 10 minutes doing the basic brush strokes and getting myself more comfortable with the use of the pen and how to get those gorgeous thick downward strokes and thin up strokes. So I really hope that you're going to enjoy this lesson. Get your brush pens out. If you don't have one yet, then any kind of pen will do. I'm going to give you a tip as well for doing some faux calligraphy. So I really hope that you enjoy this, and we'll get started. I'm going to start off by sharing a few different ways that you can use brush lettering in your journals without having to create really fancy lettered pieces. And I think that's one of the things that often holds back people when they're starting off, is thinking that they need to do whole brush lettered quotes and pages, and it can really sort of knock your confidence in the early stages. So this is one of my creative journals, and you can see I use it for some headings and really quick quotes. You don't need to be filling a whole page with it, just where you start to get practicing and get really comfortable with it. You see here again, just for headings. And the more often you practice some brush lettering, the more confident you're going to become, and then the more likely that you will be able to create some of those really gorgeous full lettered pages that you see. But so that's definitely a way to sort of start off. So that's one of my creative journals. I also have a daily journal. This is where I just write a few things that have happened throughout each day. And again, you can see I just add a little touch of brush lettering on most of my pages. It helps some of those key things to really stand out and pop out of your page, which is what we're going to be focusing on in this session today. You can even use it just in your planner. I use a bullet journal, but for doing things like your days of the week, again, some headings, anything that you're planning out. So this means that I use brush lettering every single day, so I never get rusty, and it enables me to just practice a little bit every evening, even if it's just writing the date for the next day. So I hope that helps to give you some ideas as to how you could incorporate some brush lettering into your life every day and really just stay on top of those skills. The next thing I'm going to show you is just a little bit of an introduction to brush lettering. If you've tried it before and you've struggled, it might just be that you've not yet found the right brush pen for you. So I thought I'd show you some of the differences. Two of the most common brush pens that get used are from the Tombow range. And the Tombow ABT is one of the brush pens that you'll see the most often on social media and recommended, but I don't think it's the easiest pen to start with. And this is also from the Tombow range, and it's called a Tombow Fudenosuke brush pen. And this one has a firm nib. So I'm just going to show you the difference. And I started with one of these and really struggled to control the pen, and it nearly put me off brush lettering. I love them now, but I think it's one really often to progress onto, though you might find immediately that this is the right pen for you. So this has got a much bigger brush on the end of it, and you'll get really thick downward strokes. And there's your thin upward stroke. Whereas with something like the Fudenosuke brush pen, it's smaller, but you still get that really lovely difference between the two strokes. And most of these pens can be bought as individual pens rather than a whole pack, so I definitely recommend trying a few individual pens out before you settle on a whole pack. And this black one also comes in a range of colours. And just for a bit of variety, the Zebra Mildliner brush pen's another lovely one to use, but it's most comparable, I would say, to the ABT. It's somewhere in between, but it's still got a really thick and flexible nib. And the more flexible the nib, probably the more difficult you'll find it to control. And there's a few basic strokes that I would recommend trying on a regular basis, perhaps just spend a few minutes every evening. So one thing to remember with brush lettering is that every time your pen is moving down the page, you need to be pressing hard and creating that thick downward stroke. And then when you're going up the page, you want to hold your pen really lightly, just touching the paper, so you get that lovely thin upward stroke. So definitely practice lots of the thick downs and the thin upward strokes. And then perhaps try something like this, so that you get used to moving from a thin stroke to the thick downward stroke. And I find more people struggle with the thin going upwards than the thick coming downwards. Another tip is to make sure that this part of your arm is resting on the table, and it just gives you a lot of more of an easier surface to sort of press down on because you've got the support of your arm there. The next thing is to look at doing curved lines into each other, so a thin up and curve it to come down. And that's a really nice stroke to practice, and this will help you with forming all of your letters. And then the same but the other way round, so a thick down, moving into an upward hook. And once you feel comfortable with that, moving on to joining the ups and downs just in a wavy pattern. And this will give you most of the strokes that you're going to need for any of the letters in the alphabet. And as I mentioned when I went through the journals, just starting with things like days of the week, even just abbreviations for them, even writing things like your headings on shopping lists, just give yourself the chance to practice as often as possible. And when you are lettering, you don't need to keep your pen on the paper all the time. So if I'm writing Mun for Monday, as soon as you've done your downward stroke, you could lift your pen up. And again. And then at the end of every letter, make sure you leave a little tail for the next letter to join on to. So you've got your O, you've left a tail there to join the N onto. So definitely recommend starting with some of the smaller words as well. Definitely lift your pen off. Then I'll do the same with this brush pen, the Tombow ABT, to give you a comparison. Say they are beautiful pens, I use them a lot, but they're much more difficult to control just because of how flexible the nib is. So hopefully you can see there the difference, and also depending on what kind of size paper you're creating or writing on, you might want a bigger or a smaller pen. For me, this is a really good all-rounder for if you're just doing little lists and planning, want some headings for your journal pages. And I'll write choose for Tuesday. Again, you leave that tail. And that always means that you can move your arm, you can relax your hand in between the letters. It's not like joined up writing perhaps you might have learnt at school where you're not allowed to lift your pen off. The final thing I'm going to show you is if you don't have a brush pen, you can do faux calligraphy, so which is where you're faking this same effect of the thick downward stroke and the thin upward stroke. So if I wanted to do the Tuesday, this is just a black gel pen. So you'd letter it out in the same way, but obviously you're not going to get any of those thick strokes. And I still do this sometimes if I haven't got a brush pen to hand, but I want something to stand out. So then you're going to draw those thick downward strokes in. And this is a fun lettering style in itself. And obviously you can do this then with any pen at all. So just think about the times that your pen was moving down the page, and that's where you want your thick strokes to be. And you could leave it just like that. You could colour it in with a different colour. Or if you want it to look more like brush lettering, you can just use your same pen then to colour in those thick downward strokes. And this can be a good way to practice and start to get confident with how those letters should look. Or they're just fun for putting on things like envelopes, gift tags. So I definitely recommend just trying out a few different things and a few different pens. So we're now going to move on to creating some journal pages, and what I'd recommend is gathering some things which help to represent how your daily life is at the moment. So one of the things I'm finding is that my daughter and myself are obsessed with overnight oats. So I've taken a photo of our oats, and I've taken the lid from the yoghurt. So I've got the packaging there. I'm going to use those in my journals. I've also recently had a haircut, so I decided to take a photo of myself to include. I'm probably going to document one of my favourite pens that I'm using a lot at the moment. And it's also worth just gathering a few supplies. If you've got something like packaging, then perhaps looking for some of the colours that are in there. So I've looked at the reds, the greens. So these are rolls of washi tape, but you could look at stickers or just pens in those colours, watercolour paint, anything that you'd like to add to your journal page. And I find that helps quite a lot to just narrow down my supplies. I know that everything's going to tie in, and helps me to get started on my journal pages. So have a few moments to think about things that you're loving. It could be things like TV programmes you're watching. You could print off pictures of the covers for those series or films, knitting projects, take some photos of anything that you're spending a lot of time doing. And now we'll create some really lovely pages incorporating these items and some brush lettering in our journals. For my journal page, I'm going to be creating in this A5 dotted journal. And the dots are really faint, so you can hardly see them, but it does help me to make sure that my lettering and writing all stays reasonably even. One of the first things I do when starting a journal page is look at how I can make it a little bit more inviting and less intimidating. So I like to try and break up a little bit of that white space. So I'm going to start off by adding some washi tape strips down the edge of my pages. And I'm going for a green and a red and pink type tape, so it ties in really nicely with the colours of that yoghurt lid that I know I'll be including later on. And I'm going to do exactly the same to both sides of my journal page. The next thing I'm going to do is have a look at the different elements I want to include. I'm going to start playing around with them to make sure that I'm happy with their positioning. So I've got the yoghurt pot lid and 2 photos. So I'm just going to play with them in different positions to try and get something which feels quite balanced and is still going to give me lots of space to include some writing. Once I'm happy with how everything is looking, I'm going to start sticking the images down onto my page. And for my photos, I use a Brother colour label printer, and that's really handy because the photos are printed onto a sticky paper. One of the things that I try and bear in mind when I include different elements is making sure that my 2 pages look somewhat balanced, and I find that makes them much more pleasing to the eye. So you'll see later on as I add more decorative elements, I always try and make sure that one page doesn't feel too much heavier than the other. To glue the yoghurt pot lid down, I'm going to be using some craft PVA glue. Using packaging on your journal pages is an absolutely great way of bringing in new colours and textures which really help with the visual interest of your page. And they're also such a great reminder of different foods and products that you've been trying out. Once I'm happy with how that's looking, I'm going to include the other photograph on the right hand side so that it slightly overlaps the washi tape. I find these types of pages so fun to look back through over the years, and they're also great if you've got other family members, particularly children, to be able to document their favourite things throughout the years. The next thing I'm going to do is add a heading to my journal pages, and I'm using that same Tombow Fudenosuke brush pen with a firm nib. And the heading that I'm going to add is Everyday Life. Brush lettering is a really great way to add headings to the tops of your journal pages, and I'm also going to be using it on this spread to make sure some other headings and keywords really stand out. If you're not yet feeling too confident with your brush lettering, you could definitely use a pencil to write it out first to get a feel for the spacing and then add the lettering over the top. I'm now going to add some other smaller headings. So I'm going to start off by writing out overnight oats. I really like it on my journal pages when I look at them, all of those key things really stand out, so I don't even need to read all of the writing if I don't want to. I'm already going to have a really good feel for what I was documenting at that time. And on the left-hand page, I'm going to letter out new haircut. Once I'd finished adding the key lettering pieces, I decided I also wanted to document something else. And I thought it would be a really good idea to document one of my current favourite pens, which is this Tombow Fudenosuke. So I'm going to sketch it out. And that's another really great way for just keeping a lovely record of things, is adding some quick sketches or doodles onto your journal page. And this could be stationery, art supplies, craft projects, books, anything that you like. I find that journals are such a great place to try out lettering, sketching and any other kinds of designs that you want to add. Because to me, nothing needs to be perfect in your journals. As long as it's helping to tell your story, then to me it's absolutely perfect. For inking in the outline, I'm using a Sakura Pigman Micron pen. And I find that having waterproof fine liners in your stationery stash is really handy because I know I'm going to be adding some watercolour paint over the top of this, and these type of pigment liners won't smudge at all. I'm now going to get my watercolour paints out. My paints come from London Gifties, but absolutely any type of watercolour paint would be fine, or you could use some pens or pencils to add some colour. So I'm going to mix up the colours that I want to use in this mixing palette. So I'm mixing up a dark blue to start with, and I'm also mixing up a little of the black colour too. The paintbrush I'm using is an Escoda watercolour travel brush. I'm also mixing a pinky red colour, which I won't be using to add colour to the pen, but I will be using it for some extra splashes of decoration. Now that the paint is all mixed, I'm going to move on to adding the paint onto my pen. And for this, I'm using a smaller Escoda paintbrush in a size 4. And as with everything I do in my journals, I'm never worried about it being too precise. I know that I'm going to be able to tell what this is about, and that's absolutely enough. Before moving on to adding the black paint, I did quickly dry off that first blue layer to make sure that none of the colours would run into each other. Once the black paint had dried, I moved on to adding the other details onto the pen. And I started off by using a silver gel pen to add in the little stripes. And I'm then going to use that Sakura black pen again to add in the little brush detail. When I'm doing things like this, I don't include all of the details that are on pens or anything else that I might be drawing like food. I just try and get some of the main details down. I also used a white Uniball Signo gel pen for writing in Tombow. I'm now going to use those same coloured paints to add some splashes of watercolour over my journal pages. And I find this is such a fun way to add a few other decorative elements which help tie in with the colour palette that you're using. So I'm covering my photos and designs with my hand and then just splashing some of that blue and pink paint. I'm now going to add a little more brush lettering to my page, and I'm going to write out the words Tombow Fudenosuke brush pen. And over the years, just adding all of these little lettering elements to my journal pages has definitely helped to build my confidence and my control of brush pens. And it never feels to me as intimidating as a whole quote, just adding in some little pieces of lettering on a regular basis. And I'm also going to add a little speech bubble and letter in the word yum in that top right hand corner, which really nicely adds something into that white space. I would definitely encourage you to try out some little pieces of brush lettering as often as you can and find loads of just fun ways to incorporate it into your journal with absolutely no pressure or expectations at all. The next thing I'm going to do is underline each of my headings. And for this, I'm using a Zebra Mildliner brush pen in grey. And I find that brush pens are so versatile. Obviously, they're great for lettering, but they're brilliant for doing things like this and also colouring. And you can add some water to the ink if you scribble onto plastic packaging and use them as a watercolour paint. And I love having them in lots of different colours so I can use them across all of my different journal pages. Once I get to this stage in my journal pages, I'm usually really happy because I've got those main things down that I know I want this journal page to be about. And adding the lettering and photos really helps bring those pages to life. So I'm now going to move on to adding some other fun bits of decoration. So I'm tearing up some washi tape strips and then just placing them in various places across my journal pages. I decided that I wanted to add a little more brush lettering onto that left-hand page, and I'm lettering out the words "enjoy all the little things," because to me that's exactly what these journal pages are about, making sure that I take time to appreciate the things that I'm really enjoying in life. You can see that I never rush my brush lettering. I try and relax and take my time with it to ensure that I really enjoy the process of adding those letters to my page. The next thing I'm going to do is just add an outline to my journal pages. And again, I'm going to be using that grey Zebra Mildliner pen. So I'm just putting a spare piece of paper underneath my page to make sure that I don't move any of that ink onto the pages below. And I'm gently moving that pen along the outside of the page. I often add outlines to my journal pages. Sometimes I use brush pens, otherwise I'll use things like distress ink or even doodle some dotted lines or squiggles around the edge of my pages. For me, it just gives a really fun effect to them. Before I move on to the journal writing itself, I decided I wanted to add some other fun decorative elements. And for this, I'm using some wooden block stamps and a black StazOn ink pad. If you decide you want to add other decorations at this stage, stamping is a great way to do it, or using things like stickers or cutout elements, anything that you have in your stash. And I like to have lots of space for journal writing, but I also don't like it to be too intimidating with too much white space, so adding lots of decoration really helps me with this. I'm adding 3 stamped images to my pages, and what I'm really looking for here is where I can add elements that will help to balance out my page, and also any of those awkward small white spaces where I know I won't be able to add any journal writing. I try and do a little journaling every day, not necessarily a spread like this. This is probably more something that I'll do at the weekend because it takes a little more time, but just a few lines every day that help to document my life and give me the chance to get a bit creative and try out my brush lettering. For my journal writing, I'm using a black Muji gel pen, but absolutely any kind of pen would be fine for this. And I'm just making a few notes saying there are so many lovely little things in life that can go easily unnoticed, and I'm taking the time to write about those things that mean something to me at the moment. And one of the things I really like to do is break up that journal writing by using a brush pen. And I'm just using a normal print font for this and just writing out keywords like brave. It's been about 3 years now since I've had a fringe, so just picking out some of those keywords which make your writing look really fun, and also, again, when you look back at them, those key things are really going to stand out. You can of course use other types of lettering here like I'm doing. So I've used some capital block lettering to write out the word yay, and I'll be adding some colour to that. And again, I also use washi tape or other decorations. If I've finished writing about a particular thing and there's a little bit of white space, then washi tape, stickers, stamping, anything like that works really well and gives a little bit more interest to your pages. Whilst I love using my journal to document really big and exciting things, for me, actually my most pleasurable thing is documenting all of those little everyday things. Another thing I really enjoy doing in my journals is changing the direction of my writing, which I already started to do with that Tombow Fudenosuke brush pen heading. And it can help with getting some writing into some smaller places, but also again I think it just adds another level of visual interest to your journal pages. And again, I'm using my brush pen to help some of those keywords to stand out. I really hope that you've enjoyed seeing how these journal pages have come together, and I hope that it's given you lots of ideas for bringing brush lettering into your journal pages in just small chunks that's really non-intimidating and hopefully great fun to do. Once I've finished all of my journal writing, the final thing I'm going to do is use a red Tombow ABT brush pen to just colour in that word yay on the left-hand page. So I really hope that you've enjoyed this, and I'll be back in the next episode showing you more ways to use brush lettering and to take your lettering style to the next level.